So I'm up here really to facilitate a conversation. First off, let me say thank you all for coming out. We really enjoy having opportunities like this during the middle of Global Missions Week, where we have other offices that participate and get involved with us. And so the library did this with us last year, and it was a really great time. So we reached back out to them this year and said, hey, we'd love to do it again. So here we are with a bit of a different topic, but one that I think is really pressing for us right now. More and more, I'm hearing conversations about things like, how do you finish well? And questions about ministry or missions burnout, and conversations about endurance and perseverance and things of that nature. And so we thought this would be an ideal time for us to address some of those questions and see if we could get some perspective from someone who has been a seasoned missionary on the field, somebody who has spent multiple terms and has endured and persevered in that setting. And then, of course, Dr. Akin is in his 20th year with us here at Southeastern. And so it's a fitting time for us to have this conversation, we think. So that's what we're going to do. I've got a handful of questions I'm going to walk through with them. And hopefully this is a really good follow-up, if you all were in chapel yesterday, to Paul's sermon, where he was talking out of Matthew about dying to self, right? And we think about Paul. And so his letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy, he's talking about how he pours himself out as a drink offering, right? When he's talking about finishing the race. And so this conversation about ministry and missions endurance, what does it look like for us to be those kind of people? So that's what we want to focus on today. In order to start, though, it would probably be helpful. You got the bio for each of the people up here. But let's talk a bit about the ministry experience and hear a little more about what they've done. So, John, I'm going to start with you. We all know Dr. Akin. We're meeting John, right? So let's take just a bit of time to get to know our missionary. John, can you share a bit about your family, your ministry experience on the field, kind of where you guys are serving, as much as you can tell us about where you're serving, and give us some frame of reference for the conversation?
Sure. Got my start in missions in 1997 as a junior in college. I went over on a short-term trip to Cambodia, and it was a disaster of a trip, but there was a coup that happened and a civil war broke out. We left after our third day. After our third day in country, that's when the fighting broke out. All that to say, we were evacuated. We didn't get to share the gospel with one soul, and I felt from the very instant we left the country, I felt like God was saying, "You need to come back and finish." And so, after 2 more years of school, I went back as a journeyman to Cambodia in 1999, where the Lord really affirmed His calling on my life. I wasn't sure. Journeyman can be a great opportunity to say, God, I think this is what you're wanting me to do. I think this is what you've created me for, but confirm it during these 2 years or 3 years. And He certainly did that in my life and also in my wife, Reagan, who's sitting in the back. But we came to the field in 2007. We had been married for about 5 years, and we had 2 little girls. And we found out we were pregnant with our third at orientation, field personnel orientation in Richmond, Virginia, which was a surprise, a shock, but praise the Lord. We now have 4 children. We had our first son in language school and our second son in the city where we serve now. But the Lord got us to the place where we are. I might slip up and say it. I probably will. So it's fine. In Southeast Asia, world's largest Muslim country, if you know anything about Southeast Asia. Second largest city. The Lord got us there because of my passion for reaching students and teaching English and sharing the gospel through that platform. Now we don't do that anymore. But it's just... and this goes into to probably some later questions. Flexibility is really important. Yeah. Adaptability, because at least in our experience, God changes your role and changes even what you're passionate about doing. throughout your lifetime, throughout your ministry. So flexibility is key. I teach English at a Christian university, but I spend about 2 days a week on campus. They understand what we're doing there, and the rest of the time is spent with our IMB team and our Indonesian national partners, where we're just sharing the gospel with as many people as we can, discipling those believers and trying to plant house churches in the city and outside the city. So that's a little bit about us.
Excellent, excellent. So you've got some perspective now for John. Dr. Akin, let's talk a bit about your kind of pathway here. Of course, we're in the 20th year with you here, but before that, I have a feeling a lot of our students don't know all the different things you've done in ministry, where you've served, and kind of how you got into ministry to start with. So maybe run through that a bit with us.
Okay. Let me reaffirm real quickly what John said, because I've said for almost my entire life in ministry, blessed are the flexible. Yeah. They will not burn out. Real. And I think there's real truth in that.
Real.
Yes, because if you are locked into a particular way of thinking, things have to be done, and this is all, you're not going to last. You've got to be flexible, because the Lord doesn't reveal his whole will to us when we start. It's a journey of faith. So it's continually being revealed. And what I'm doing today was never on my radar screen. God called me into the ministry after kind of a wayward teenage life on a mission trip to an Indian reservation in Sales, Arizona. And I went to my pastor and said, "What do I do now?" And he says, "Well, you probably need to go to seminary." And I said, "Okay, what's a seminary?" I had no idea what a seminary was. I didn't know anything. I'd been a jock, went to college to play baseball. This was not on my radar screen. But he then said, there's a small Bible college that if you want to get started now, I would certainly commend that. So compressing, moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Dallas, Texas, went to Crystal College, was there for a year by myself. Didn't like that. Went back to Atlanta, asked Charlotte to marry me. Thankfully, she said yes. We got married on a Saturday, May the 27th. Drove to Dallas on Sunday, May the 28th. Thankfully, Monday was Memorial Day, because on Tuesday, I went back to school, she went to work. Great. And that's how we got started. Crystal College, Southeastern Seminary, PhD at the University of Texas at Arlington. I always tell people that consider a PhD, there's several factors you should consider. One may be, I want to go to a particular institution. One may be, I want to study with a particular professor. Or 3, convenience. And the convenience was the third category for me, because I was serving a church in Dallas. UTA was 30 miles away, and it just worked really well. And they had a good humanities program as well. So then started teaching at Crystal College, taught there for 5 years. I actually taught at Southeastern from 1992 to 96. I was also the dean of students. Then in 96, I went to Southern Seminary and worked there for almost 8 years with Al Muller, and then came back here in the year 2004. And as you mentioned a moment ago, I'm now beginning my 21st year here at Southeastern.
It's exceptional. So that's the pathway for Dr. Akin. If you had not heard his story before, it gives us a glimpse into all the different places that you've served and the ways that you got to where you are here. So if you'll notice, there's a reason we've got these two men in front of us to have this conversation, right? We've got some demonstrated endurance here. You're old. I was trying to find the nice way to say it. So let's do this, though. Let me start with this question to both of you. So we often hear stories about missionary and ministry burnout. It's really hard for us to have clear numbers on burnout and motivations for why people may leave the field. However, in your experience, because you guys both have some experience here at this point, right? You've watched other people who haven't endured. What do you think are some of the major reasons that people leave the field? Whether that's international mission specifically, or even ministry here in the States, pastoral ministry or North American missions here.
A couple of things. One, they never really solidified their calling. And I know that we have in the last 10 to 15 years have kind of de-emphasized that. Yeah. I think that's a massive mistake, and I don't think it's biblical either. And I've got good friends that talk in terms of, well, you just kind of go with what you feel like, you'd like to do. Well, what are you going to do when you don't feel like it? you'll walk away. When it gets hot in the kitchen, you'll look for the back door. But if you have an unalterable conviction, which I do, and by the way, I didn't have a framework for this, because I did not walk with the Lord, but on a Monday night in an old-fashioned revival service in Sales, Arizona, more clearly than my conversion, I knew that God had called me into the ministry, and therefore there would be nothing else that I would ever do except serve the Lord in some capacity in the ministry. Well, if you have that kind of conviction, you can't do anything else. And it will sustain you through very trying, hard, and difficult times. So I think that's one thing, Keelan. Secondly is people that people that do walk away, burn out, I think they almost without exception have lost their close, daily, intimate time with the Lord, because He renews you. And He strengthens you day by day. And when you've spent that time with Him, it helps you then deal with the issues that you're going to face in that particular day. And then the third thing for me, and I'll stop here, is I really see immense value, which is one of the reasons I've given a lot of time to it in the last 10 to 12 years, in reading missionary biographies. I cannot overstate the encouragement that I have received from reading their lives story and seeing how God used them. Very ordinary people that God used in an extraordinary way because of their close walk with Him and their driving conviction. God has called me to this work, and God has called me to this place. Read the stories of Carrie, Judson, Moon, Bertha Smith. I can go on and on and on. And they all had that rock-solid conviction, this is what God has called me to do. And when you see what they went through, getting an ugly email from somebody, it just doesn't seem to be such a big deal. It just doesn't. I mean, people will sometimes say you get a lot of criticism. Well, anytime God calls you to a position of leadership, you're going to get criticized. That just comes with the territory. But when you compare, all right, somebody told me they think I'm a scum-sucking dog and ought to be fired tomorrow as president of Southeastern Seminary. And then I look over here and see that Adoniram Judson spent almost 2 years in a Burmese prison. His wife delivered their baby girl. She was having at night to go to the prison. They would let Judson out. He would take their baby daughter to Burmese women, pleading with them to nurse the baby because Anne was so emaciated, she could not nurse their baby. Finally, he gets out of prison in a short amount of time. Anne dies, then his daughter dies, and yet he never leaves the field. So getting someone to write you an ugly email or a nasty letter, I mean, grow up. Grow up and put things in proper perspective, and that, again, will help sustain you in the work that God's called you to, because we're always going to get opposition and criticism. That just comes with life. What you have to do is have a good way of dealing when those things come.
Yeah. Those are three very, I think I would agree with you exactly. Maybe I'll contextualize Dr. Akin's answer to the field. Strong conviction. If we're led by our emotions, which I think that's the way the world is trending right now, is that we're very emotionally led people in a culture. But I heard someone wise once say, "Feel what you feel, but know what you know." And we always go back to the Word. We always go back to that moment when we remember God spoke to me and He said, "Do this." Whatever it is, and I can go back to a moment in Memorial Stadium, hallowed ground. Some people might even call it a holy place in University of Oklahoma football stadium. I don't, but some people would. I was sitting there reading my Bible, and I was reading, and God, do you want me to go as a journeyman? Is that just my wishes, or is this what you want? And I was reading in Isaiah 58 of all places, and He said, "I want you to go." And I remember that, and I can go back to that point in my life, and that's what I know. And it was a feeling, but He also over the course of my 2 years, continued to affirm that conviction. Also, I would say people burn out because we have grand expectations. And when those don't happen, we're discouraged, we're disappointed. So having realistic expectations before you go overseas, if that's where you end up, not that we want to set the bar so low that we don't really accomplish much ever, but we have to realize that when you're in your first term for the first 3 years or so, maybe longer if you're going to China or someplace where the language is really difficult. First 3 or 4 years, you talk like a small child, and how can you really be an effective evangelist, an effective disciple maker, and church planner when you speak like a third grader? It's possible. God uses us in our weakness, but it's also realistic to have expectations that say, you know what, I'm going to really get good at this language. I'm really going to get good at learning the people and their heart and their culture, and not having expectations that I'm going to start a church planting movement in my first term, because a lot of people do. And as good of a job as the IMB does in their orientation to prepare us for the field, and they tell us these things, we still have our own desires and wishes and expectations that go beyond what they tell us is probably going to happen. So having and we try to do that with our new personnel is just to let them focus and encourage them in the small things. And I do tell them, don't expect to. If you lead someone to faith in your first term, you're probably in a very small minority, and it's great, and it does happen, but it's not necessarily something that happens a lot. You said, it reminds me that surrounding yourself with godly people. You said we get out of the Word, we get out of our intimacy with the Lord when we start to feel this discontent, this discouragement with our state. And living overseas, ministry anywhere is hard. Living overseas is hard ministry, and it's hard culture shock. It's hard not being able to communicate. It's hard. It's a different kind of hard. But it is also very hard. So it's very easy to just want to give up and come back and do hard ministry in a place where you're familiar. And so surrounding yourself with godly people who and Rick Fraley, is he still here? We lived in the same city for about 2 years together, and he and I and about 4 other men got together every week, and we sat down in Starbucks, which was it was just our little haven of America in Southeast Asia, and we talked about our lives. We talked about our ministry. We read books together, and we held each other accountable. We shared our struggles, and it's absolutely essential to surround yourself with godly people. You can't do this alone, and making sure that you are in the Word every day, and so those are my thoughts.
That's excellent. There's some excellent advice here. A couple of things, like if I can summarize a bit of what you guys have said here, right? So you keep hearing over and over a firm conviction in your calling, right? Like you're hearing that over and over, and yet we're also hearing advice that we have to be flexible. Those things are not mutually exclusive, by the way. That's not. I think oftentimes, if we're not careful when we have the calling conversation, we think we're called to a particular ideal of ministry. And if I don't get to do it this way in this place under my circumstances, then I must have misunderstood my calling. And in reality, that's confusing inflexibility with calling. What is it you're called to? Is it making disciples in this place, no matter what pathway or platform I have to use to do it? My circumstances may change on the job that I have to hold to be here, or whatever it is. And yet my calling is firm. My family circumstances may change. My health circumstances may change, but my calling is secure. And so I wind up being flexible in my circumstances, but firm in my calling, right? So I think that's an excellent place for us to anchor down some of the conversation here. One thing I do think is helpful for us to think through on this topic, though. So every time somebody leaves the field, it's not burnout. There are other reasons that people would leave. It's a cloud of things. And I think it helps us to disambiguate some of that, to pull some of those things apart. There are sometimes unavoidable reasons why a person would leave the field. Think a war starts and you get evacuated, right? So there are circumstances sometimes that are so extreme that would force a leave, if potentially temporary, but maybe forever. You may lose entry to a particular country because your visa gets burned or something to that effect. So there are unavoidable reasons people have to leave the field sometimes. However, there's this whole category of reasons that could probably be classed as avoidable. And those are the ones we really need to pay attention to. And being able to navigate the difference between the two, I think a temptation that I feel I often see nowadays when talking to people about triaging them, about leaving the field, is confusing avoidable circumstances with unavoidable circumstances. You start to justify your leave based in categorizing it as something that's just unavoidable. But avoidable circumstances for leaving the field, think moral failure. Think issues with emotional, spiritual burnout, and things of that nature. How do we prepare well before we get there and in ministry to avoid those kind of circumstances and settings? And that's a thing that I think is a skill we all have to understand in ministry, is how to keep ourselves healthy in a physical sense, in a spiritual sense, and an emotional sense, so that we avoid running into a situation where we have one of those reasons for leaving the field, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've talked a bit about main reasons maybe, and we've talked a bit about some of the things that would help us to anchor there. Let me ask this, I guess. So you guys have both been in ministry. You're serving in your field long enough now to have endured some unexpected hardships, right? Things that crop up along the way, circumstances that, well, I would have never seen that coming. And yet, you're both still sitting up here, kind of hand to the plow in the ministry. Can either of you speak to how you count the cost, knowing I'm going to go into this thing and there's going to be stuff that comes up that's unexpected, and then maybe how you navigate those unexpected hardships that show up in the middle of your tenure and stay the course?
Well, I'll do a quick kind of testimony of our time. When Keelan yesterday was talking about the library talk today, and he said that I would be speaking, Reagan kind of nudged me, my wife, and said, "You're one of the old guys now." And I don't feel that way. But looking back, we do have a story to tell, and it's, hear my heart. It is God that did it, and I feel like myself. If I can help you visualize the way I see myself in God's work, is that like I'm a ship in the ocean, and He's just leading me where He wants me to go, because I'm not smart enough to really hear Him tell me where to go, and so or sensitive enough to His Spirit, and that's my true heart of how I see myself in this, in the fact that we've lived for 17 years in the same country and 16 years in the same city is a testimony to God's grace. Because when we started, we found out we were pregnant at orientation. My wife had a baby in a small village. I would call it a village. It's I don't know how big is Saltika, Mike? 500,000? Oh, a couple 100,000, small village, right? A couple 100,000. But the hospital situation was not great. We had a baby halfway through our first term of our first year of language study, so it's hard on her. We've got a little girl who's 2, a little girl who's 9 months, and we're having another baby. I mean, that was hard on my wife. It was hard on me. And then we made it to our city, and we saw our teammates come and go, some because of sickness, some because they got married, some because they weren't allowed by the board to come back because of their children's needs and education. It's various reasons for why some people transferred to other cities. Praise God, all of the personalities that we've gotten to work alongside over the years. But, we saw a lot of transition on our team. And eventually we became the team leaders. Not ready, not really, in our opinion, not ready to lead a team, but we were kind of the last man standing, and so we were asked to do that. And so just struggling through not really knowing how to be a good leader, not really knowing how to be a good missionary, and still trying to lead others. And so God was gracious through that time. Then we find out we're pregnant again, and I remember talking to God on the way to taking my little girl to school, and it's like, God, why am I here? All I do is help my wife with the kids, and I teach English at night, and I'm not really able to do what my expectations were. And so, another moment of God just clearly speaking to my heart, and he said, John, take care of your family. It'll come. And so, so just being able to have those moments of clarity with God's calling on my life, but also being surrounded by such wonderful leadership has really been helpful. But we found out our son has special needs, and that was another blow. Our second stateside assignment, we went through a period of grieving, just knowing that he may not ever leave our home, and how does that work? Are we going to be able to stay on the field? We love what we do. And let me say this, there's been lots of moments when I felt like, God, I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't want to do anything else. And so that was one of those times, God, what are we going to do if we're not doing this? And so our lives are continually in His hands. And but by His grace, we've been able to stay. God continues to provide resources for us to keep our son in our home with us and educate him. But through all these things, we've been able. And again, I think it goes back to the people you surround yourself with, and is so important to us. Having such great mentors on the field. We also one thing that's and this is the last thing I'll say. When and if you go overseas, you've got to make a faith family that really encourages you and that you encourage as well. That was essential for us. That every week we knew that we were gonna. We went to Indonesian church. Sorry, we went to our church. But we also had our English time of worship where we got to sing praise music in our own language, and we studied the Word together in English, and we held each other accountable. We shared our struggles. We prayed for each other, and that, I think, without that, our teammates came and went, but our other we call them GCC, Great Commission Christian partners in the city that were not IMB. We worshiped together with them. That was key for our longevity, is having that faith family that we could rely on. We could look forward to each week that we were going to get together with.
Nick Ricken will be with us in chapel tomorrow. All of you, I would hope, have read his book, The Insanity of God. If you hadn't, you need to. And in that book, one of the things he says that they learned when they interviewed all of the members of the persecuted church, what sustained them. 1 was scripture memorization, 2 was prayer, but 3 was singing in their heart language. And music just has a way of ministering to the soul that I don't think can be achieved by other means. And I can readily identify with what John's saying. The only thing I would add, and it's really not adding, it's just laying a foundation, and it's deeply theological. I really do believe that God is sovereign.
Yeah.
I mean, what a novel idea for a Bible believer. And I also believe he's omniscient. Yeah. So God never has an aha moment. It's never for God, oh, goodness, I didn't see this coming. I didn't know that they were going to be in that situation. God knew before time even began where you would be and what you'd be going through. And he purposed that you would be there going through that. And if you believe that, there's a strength that comes to sustain you and to stay with it because God put you there for a purpose. You may not know it until we're in it, but that's fine. That's one of the reasons we walk by faith and not by sight.
Exceptional. Yeah, so you guys have hit on several of my next questions here, actually. I was going to talk about things that you do to avoid burnout and spiritual things, physical things, mental and emotional things. I feel like you guys have hit a number of those as we've talked. So let me go ahead and do this. Let me turn a corner a bit here. And this may be a bit speculative for us, but I think it's a helpful conversation. How can someone process and heal from burnout if they maybe already feel like they're there on the field? What are the ways maybe we can step back from that or heal from it?
Well, I think we all need time to retreat and times where we can just, take a deep breath and get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life and work. And there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I would say everything right with it. And again, one of the benefits of reading all these missionary biographies is all of these men and women did do that. I'm not pushing it, but I do have another book coming out in April called 10 Women Who Changed the World. And it's been a labor of love to investigate these mostly unknown heroes of the faith. One lady in particular, Lilias Trotter, who Rebecca Pate put me on to, who ministered in Algeria, died in Algeria, buried in Algeria, came out of British aristocracy, but she was a single, never married, in a very hard area. In fact, at the end of her life, she regretted that she had not seen massive fruit from decades of service, and yet she also reminded herself, God is in control. Perhaps he's used me simply to sow the seed for a harvest that will come later. But she took regular periods of retreat, sometimes as long as 2 or 3 months. And she battled. She died in her deathbed, her sick bed that she had been in for several years. Her last years were spent praying and bringing counsel to the others that were now doing the work that she was not capable of doing. She never thought about leaving the field, which is amazing to me. But she took regular periods of rest to revitalize, to recharge her batteries. And I think that's one thing, and I know that the IMB works very hard to make those periods of time possible and readily available. And we all need that. You're over here ministering, and it's hard. I was talking to a gentleman this week that's looking for a pastor, and I just talked about the need of honoring your pastor with a sabbatical. And I said, 3 weeks to 6 weeks from the beginning, he'll be a better minister if you will allow that to be just a part of your expectations for him. And I'm thankful that more churches now think like that. That wasn't the case when I was much younger. And I think, again, men suffered because they just needed a time away and a time to be alone with the Lord and with their family.
100% agree. Sabbath rest. It's a weekly rhythm, and we try to do a monthly rhythm, an annual rhythm of just getting away from the work. I don't do it very well. But by the grace of God, we're okay. But there's been a lot of times of just frustration and even anger comes out, because I'm tired and I'm tired of the noise and I'm tired of the phone calls and the texts from different people. But our company, the IMB, does a great job of making sure that every 3 or so years we come back, and it isn't completely restful. Let me say this: we love being here. this is a joy to our hearts. We've said that a number of times to each other. This is a lot of fun. Makes us feel younger. But there is work involved, and we connect with churches and we have speaking engagements. But it's very restful. It's restful to eat Chick-fil-A, and but Sabbath rhythms are key, and overcoming burnout it's also, you need that time when you start to feel that coming on, no matter where you are, to be able to get away. We get outside of our city on occasion and go to the mountains where it's cooler, and or go to the beach. Dr. Akin years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, came to one of our used to call them AGMs, annual, where all of our missionaries from our region got together, and we retreated, and we heard someone else preach the Word of God to us, and we sang songs in English. And unfortunately, because of financial restrictions, we're not able to do that every year. But it's still an important part. And I would point to that as one reason why we're still on the field. Especially for our early years, every June we could count on going to Bali and worshiping and seeing our friends and just and letting someone else watch our kids and do VBS with them. Hearing the Word preached to us, it was so important to us, and that was a Sabbath for us in a way. It was very, very fulfilling.
So hearing you guys talk, the importance of rest and rhythms built into that, I think it's perhaps helpful. And you mentioned the sovereignty of God in our circumstances and in the settings we find ourselves in. Like, there is, at least I feel this, a tension between that challenge and encouragement to pour yourself out like a drink offering, as Paul would say, and the realization that having rhythms of rest are necessary for those of us who are very finite creatures, and understanding that when I go to sleep at night, God doesn't, right? And so if I need a rest, the work of God doesn't stop in a given area because I sat down to take a breather, right? Like, there's some confidence, I think, that comes in the ability to Sabbath when we have that kind of perspective on the situation. And another thing that you said it, and I want to pull it out of what you said and just make it explicit. If you're feeling like you may be careening toward some form of burnout, don't do that in a corner. No. Like, don't do that by yourself. That exacerbates the problem. This is not one of those things you're just going to muscle up and get over on your own. And so when you talk about the importance of AGMs and the importance of being able to be with community for that rest and the worship, and how corporate worship often provides us that rest as well, there's a community aspect to all of that I think is crucial. It's irreducible for us in the ability to finish the race that's in front of us well. And that's also true when you feel like you're starting to get in trouble. I think the knee-jerk temptation, whether it's moral, it's emotional, it's spiritual, when you feel like you're getting in trouble, the knee-jerk reaction is to isolate because of it. And that's exactly the opposite of what we need to do, right? We need to lean into others in a moment like that. Actually, a couple more questions real quick. And then I want us to be able to do some questions with you guys. Is there a way to return to mission work after burnout? Is there a path back? Maybe a quicker answer on this one. Do you guys think that's an option?
Yes.
That's a quick answer. I like it.
No, there is. You may need that time to rest, that time to be loved on. And by the way, a lot of us need to develop the grace of letting people love on us. Some of us aren't very good. We love to serve others, but you need to be able to let others serve you. Don't expect it, but you rejoice in it and give gratitude and thanksgiving when it happens. And we all need to be able to do that because God brings brothers and sisters into our lives. Just look at the Bible. Again, Elijah needed a period of rest. Yes. Paul, the rock star of missionaries, he needed Timothy. He needed Luke. He needed the brothers and ladies, sisters around him to encourage him. He got discouraged. Mm-hmm. He got depressed. He did. Read the read the epistles, and it's so evident. But these brothers and sisters, God brought into his life to strengthen him and sustain him. Now, ultimately, of course, his dependence, 2 Timothy, is on the Lord. But even then, Luke's still with me, and there's some others in the midst. And so I think you just have to allow yourself to be cared for during that period of time. And then I believe God, out of that, gives you the renewed strength to continue ministry. Now, will it be exactly the same ministry? Maybe yes, maybe no. Again, I remind myself daily, I'm here doing what I do because the commander-in-chief put me here. It was not my choice. I didn't have anything to do with it. He did it all. And if he wants to move me somewhere else or to do something else tomorrow, all my response should be is, yes, sir. Because he's the commander-in-chief. We're simply, for a season, his servants. A few weeks ago, I was asked to preach the first message in Joshua over at Open Door because they're going through the book. And the drumbeat of all the men I read was God's servants come and go, but God remains the same. Because how does Joshua begin? Moses, my servant, is dead. Yeah. Lo and behold, heaven was not wringing its hands. God was not caught by surprise. He had raised up and prepared a Joshua. Joshua, by the way, at the end of the book, he dies, and then God raises. God's servants come and go. God remains the same. Keep that in mind. Keep yourself in proper perspective, and I think that too will help you get back into the fight if you need that period of time to rest. And there's nothing wrong for needing that time to rest. Nothing at all.
That reminds me as well, something that I wanted to say. Certainly, we can come back from burnout. I don't have any specific examples of that I can think of, but I know it's happened. And what you said, Dr. Akin, about people come and go, servants come and go, God remains the same. And that goes back to an earlier discussion that we talked about, our expectations. And we come on fire, and that's good. We want to have that spirit-filled desire to see the nations reached, or whatever ministry you're in, and we have grand expectations, but that sometimes turns into a very prideful kind of perspective, and so from the get-go, I wish someone had told me this, but from the get-go, I wish someone had said, John, your calling is important. It's from God. You'd never forget that. But you're not that important. If it's not you, I'll find someone else. And that's changed our perspective over the last several years, particularly when we start to develop national partners. And Mike can talk extensively about this, is that we're taking more and more of a back seat to the ministry. And we're coming in more of a supportive role to our national partners, and not just our national partners, but our IMB folks that are in their first term coming through. These people might be our boss someday, and what are you doing to invest in them? I'm not that important. I don't have to, even though I can do it probably the best. We have first termers on our team. I have the language. I have the culture. I have all these things. I have the experience. I can do it better than them. But what am I doing to put them in situations where they're going to be stretched and they have to get on their knees and say, God, I can't do this. I need you. And I sit back and I watch them, and I'm there. I'm helping them. I'm watching them, but they're doing it. And that helps me to realize I'm replaceable. Read 2 Timothy 4. Paul says it in other places. You know what, God, if I'm ready to go, but if not, I'll stay. He saw himself because he had equipped other believers to do the work in his absence. And we want to make sure, if we have that proper perspective and that expectation from early on, I think it will help us not to get so high on ourselves.